The RTÉ Rugby Podcast, sponsored by Canterbury, proud official kit suppliers to the Irish men and women's rugby teams.
And you're very welcome to the RTÉ Rugby Podcast. After week one of the United Rugby Championship, I'm delighted to say, most teams got off to a positive start with Ireland. We can't say the same about the women's national team, obviously, with what happened on Saturday against Scotland and the World Cup gone as a result. Delighted to welcome Donal Lenihan, Wes Liddy and Fiona Hayes to the podcast. You're all very welcome, guys. Look, I suppose we'll start with a bit of a positive before, Fiona, we delve into what happened on Saturday and I guess the repercussions of it. But Donal, to be at Thomond Park, because yourself and I were, to have a crowd back, to have Munster back to winning ways against one of the South African sides in the new look competition, sure, what could be wrong with life at the moment?
Yeah, it was fantastic, I must say, having endured the last 12 months. Now, I suppose, look, we better be careful here. We were in a privileged few that were able to at least go to matches. But sitting in the stands for a lot of the games, you know, no crowds in there. It was awful. Go back even to the early internationals. A lot of players, Hugh Cahill in particular, stood out in my head. I think he won 11 caps in a row and his family never got to see him play in an Irish jersey. So to see, during July, obviously, we had the USA and Japan. There was 4,000 people in the Aviva. Look, I was lucky to go to South Africa for RTÉ Radio. We did the test series there, but it was absolutely awful in terms of if there's any one side that's geared for a crowd, it's the Lions, and the colour of the pageantry, everything around that. Cape Town, the stadium in Cape Town and Greenpoint, you've been there for Sevens duties. Yeah. It's a magnificent stadium. It was built for the Soccer World Cup in 2010, and to see it empty was awful. So I have to say, having traffic back on the road from Cork to Limerick, going into Thomond Park, 11,000 people. I mean, it felt like a full crowd. You add that the sort of the vibe around Simon Zebo just when he was warming up, you could see the kids, and this is the great thing, the kids were back in Thomond Park. They were hanging over the wall. Zebo's warming up. I mean, he's such a charismatic guy. He's built for kids. The kids, he'll salute them, he'll smile at them, he'll talk to them, even during the warm-up. I mean, they don't get that from anybody else. So to score as he did after 6 minutes, it kind of it just gave a reminder of what we've been missing over the last 18 months. And, you know, as we go on, more and more crowds will be allowed into the stadium. So, look, it was great. It was fantastic.
Listen, I can tell you, like Wes and Fiona, Donal says he loves the crowds being back, but I tell you, when he and I were hot-tailing it out of there, he wanted to get back on the road to Cork. He was handing off lads left and right. He was back in his former playing days, zigging out into the crowd.
Exactly. Like, well, the Ryder Cup was on.
Yeah, exactly. The Ryder Cup was on. He went back to Cork. But look, it was brilliant. And look, Fiona as well, I think Donald's point about Simon Zebo as well, as soon as he came out for the kind of pre-match warm-up as well, there was a big cheer. He had a big smile on his face, and it was like almost he never left. He was straight back into it and straight back in with a try as well. It was great to see.
Yeah, it was brilliant to see for the fans. I mean, I'd normally go, the mother's house is right beside Thomond Park, so I'd normally be up there.
That's handy to know. That's
yeah. Used to jump the wall back in the day, but those days are gone now. But yeah, no, I had an AIL match, so we watched it after the game, and just even the excitement down in Ballincollig anytime Zebo got on the ball and when he scored, and of course he's all salute to the crowd after the try was brilliant. Even the bar was going mad. So it's a great buzz to have him back. What you think of him, people will debate what they think of him as a rugby player, but for the crowds, just for his whole personality around the place, absolutely brilliant for Thomond Park, for him to be back again, home, as he calls it.
Yeah, and Wes, if I gave you a choice, between at the first game of the United Rugby Championship at Thomond Park in Munster or to be at Limerick's All-Ireland final, you'd have a real struggle, wouldn't you, about which
Yeah, really, it'd be a tough one, all right. Yeah. It was brilliant to have it back, and like the new tournament, and it was just Zebo obviously added to it, I suppose, in a less fan favourite way, but just a significant way on the field. Was probably massive to have Sneman getting some time as well. I suppose, like, you wouldn't want to be negative on the first week of it. You want to see how it plays out, but there possibly was a couple of worries for the tournament in the performance of some of the South African teams. So other than that, though, yeah, delighted it's back for sure.
Yeah, and look, I guess this is the point, Donal, that Wes alluded to. Leinster were very comfortable ultimately against the Bulls. The first half, we saw a lot of Sharks in possession against Munster, but it did very little with it. They certainly didn't get any points on the board. And it wasn't really until the final 15, 20 minutes when they kind of opened up and sort of said to themselves, God, we could actually play a bit of rugby here and might have some success, that we saw them start to play. Now, look, it's going to take time for the South African sides to bed in, first of all. You know, they're away from home for a lot. They're missing their Springbok contingent. We can't expect them to be, you know, dominating games from the off against the best sides in the competition from the very first weekend, can we?
No, we can't. And I think, to be fair, look, you know, there was nothing in the performances over the weekend that surprised us overly. We felt it was going to take time for them to bed in. To be fair to Leinster, I thought the team that would stand up and create the most difficulties for the opposition would have been the Bulls. I mean, the Bulls put 44 points on the Sharks in the Currie Cup final only 2 weeks prior to it. You look at the quality they had in their side in a number of areas, and the fact that Leinster, as clinical as ever, it was like Leinster, you know, there was no pre-season, there was no summer break. They were back into their mould almost immediately, 17-0 up in the first 20, 30 minutes. So the performance of the Bulls surprised me a little bit. But look, there are huge issues surrounding a lot of the franchises in South Africa. It was made very obvious to me when I was down there. The Sharks, you know, are a proud province, the old Natal as we would have known them. Like, there's challenges on all fronts in South African rugby. Not least, I was talking to somebody in the Sharks, and they say, look, our biggest challenge every year, we've been through 7, 8 real good quality young players, and within another 12 months they're gone overseas. So there's a constant churning of their squads. The Bulls, to be fair, it's going the other way. Jake White, there's a big backer in the Bulls. He's bringing back, we saw, you know, the likes of Marcel Coetzee had gone back there last year. Arno Botha, that we'd know from Munster. Bismarck du Plessis has gone back from Montpellier. So I think they will get stronger. I think there's a recognition that the rugby up here is far better than they had anticipated. Like the Bulls being hammered by Benetton in the final of the Rainbow Cup was a real eye-opener for those in South Africa. But look, there is talent there. We've got to be patient. The Sharks, as you say, I mean, as the game went on, it was almost as if they threw the shackles off. The two wingers, they showed what they could do. And bear in mind, you know, as we said in commentary, wait till November, December. Munster go down to Pretoria. They go to Joburg. They'll be playing at 6,000 feet. It'll be 32 degrees. It'll be slightly different at Thomond Park on a lovely autumnal evening. So there are different challenges. But, you know, I'm in this for the long haul. I think the South African, the 4 top South African franchises, the best thing that's happened to the newly formed league. Bear in mind, the season after next, one of them will be in the Heineken Cup. And I think it's only a matter of time before South Africa join the Six Nations. So this is a marathon, not a sprint. Yeah. And we've got to be patient.
Yeah,
I don't know if you heard during the week, but there was some talk that a couple of the South African franchises may have to play their home games in Italy, which would be a huge blow, I think, to their competitiveness in the tournament and probably ultimately their interest levels if they're away from home for that long. And maybe I would have concerns that would be very anticlimactic if that happened.
Yeah, well, obviously that's all as a consequence of the COVID scenario, which is still fairly stark down in South Africa. I mean, it's only August since we were there. There's curfews there. So, I mean, there's still a lot happening down there. They were hoping, I think, to have fans, some element of fans back in their own stadia for those games in November, December. There was talk initially of them setting up camps in Northern Italy or Croatia. But for them not to have home games, again, it's almost going to be like another last year for the tournament. And if that happens, that would be a blow. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. What did you make of Munster, Fiona? Just the performance overall, maybe a couple of times. I know Craig Casey got man of the match. Zebo scored, obviously. Joey Carberry, well, I'll leave you to it. What did you think of them overall?
Yeah, I suppose they've yet answered questions, I suppose, that were there from last season on the attacking front. I mean, some of the tries scored were exciting. I thought Dan Goggin in the centre, although it wasn't an absolutely outstanding performance, I thought he done his job well. A nice little chip through for Zebo's second try. Joey Carberry, it's almost like a work in progress. We know what he can offer. I love the way he plays the game he plays it on the Glen. I love when he gets involved and he's there and he shows up. I thought he was in and out of the game, to be honest with you. And I do firmly believe that Healy will put slight pressure on him at times with that starting jersey with Munster, because I actually thought when he came on, he done a few very good things. Good performance overall, but when I watched back the Leinster, I suppose, performance the next day, and I may have viewed Munster in a different light after watching that. They were so clinical, they were slick hands, their catch pass, everything about them was absolutely top notch in that game. And although Munster played good rugby at times, I think there was a lot to improve, and I definitely think it is kind of slowly going to build up through the season. But I just wish we came out of the blocks absolutely firing, and and that's where we want to be, and that's how you go through a season, and the fans want to see that attacking platform that we haven't seen in maybe last season, slightly at times, but not all the time.
And that's why I suppose I specifically mentioned Joey Carberry there. And look, we know the injury that he had, Fiona, and how long he was out. But I keep coming back to the Joey Carberry that was plucked from the AIL Clontarf into the Leinster squad, straight into the Almost Irish setup then, and how he was playing at that time was just this abandonment of fear, this complete almost carelessness at times, but it worked so well because of the way he was able to approach the game, the speed at which he was able to play the game at, the lines he used to take it out half, or even when he was switched to full back as well. And that player is still a long way off from what we see in the current guys. Now, I think Munster fans and the Munster coaches are placing a lot of faith that he can return to that form. But I guess there's no guarantees. And it's just a little bit worrying that he hasn't really shown anywhere near that glimpse of form that we see today. Is it?
Yeah, it's definitely that. We haven't seen that. I mean, that, as you said, that no fear Joey Carberry, that kind of, but I suppose once you get into a structured system and you move up the chain, when you get into Leinster, into Ireland, I think there's a lot of pressure put on your shoulders. And I even think towards the end of his injury, was he playing the best rugby we've ever seen, or we've seen him play in the past? Maybe not, so that's the thing. He does have that X factor, but does he bring it enough in the games, I suppose? And for me, it's that consistent game time at 10. I mean, we spoke about it so often in the women's game, there was 10s in and out, but the more game time he gets, I think he will start to become more comfortable with the players around him, who he's playing with. He's obviously in a Munster team where he hasn't had a big long run of games. So it's about getting in there, getting that game time, and hopefully we'll start to see that X factor when he relaxes a little bit. A lot of weight on his shoulders as well.
What did you think of him, Donal?
I thought he had a mixed game. As Fiona said, looking from an attacking perspective, he didn't have the impact on the game that you would have thought. But probably more concern is on the defensive side. We saw a bit of this last year. Carberry's defence was always superb. I could understand having been out of the game for so long. He had a couple of questionable defensive performances. I think he missed 6 tackles against the Sharks on Saturday night. So, I mean, that is a confidence thing more than anything. And but look, I think he's deserved. He has credit in the bank. He's been out for so long. And it does happen with a player like Carberry when you're trying to prove yourself almost immediately. Every time you get on the ball, you're trying to do something rather than settle in and, just allow yourself to grow into the game. Look, by virtue of the fact that he sprinted off and he was replaced by Healy, it's a question now of he needs a run of 4 or 5 games. I would imagine the likes of Andy Farrell will be watching him very critically with the November internationals coming up. You want him putting pressure on Johnny Sexton, and I think that for me is one of the key elements within the Munster setup. Ben Healy, no question, he did well again when he came on, but I would say Ben Healy was outstanding coming off the bench last year. There were games that he started in when he just seemed to lack the confidence that you need from that starting position. I remember one game in Benetton, really, he took 2 steps backwards, I felt at the time. And there is a lot of competition within that setup, which you need. But look, I think you put Damien Dialande back in that side with Chris Farrell next to Joey Carberry. You've so many other options there. Look, I've no doubt he'll come good. I think right now his priority is playing, a block of games, be it 3 or 4 games, just build himself back into get his confidence up. And, I've no doubt we will get back to the player we saw 2 or 3 years ago.
Whereas I didn't quite realise it was 6 mixed tackles, which is a lot. And Donal says he has credit in the bank, which he does, absolutely. I guess the issue is how much credit does he have and how long would that credit extend for? I mean, Ireland needs Joey Carberry to put pressure on Sexton. Munster need him as well to kind of lead the way. We know Billy Burns really isn't up to an international level. Jack Carty struggled for consistency as well. You know, so Johnny Sexton is still our main fly half. And Joey Carberry, I think we're all desperate to see hit some of that form back. But there's no guarantees that he will. And I think the longer this goes on, the more people are kind of going, Jesus, like, is it going to happen at all, you know?
I think the injury is overlooked as well, though. I think it does. You look at any sport, it does take an amount of time to get your best form back after you recover. I think, look, Joe Schmidt is a pretty astute judge of talent and not a huge risk taker in selection necessarily. So when he plucked him at the level of his career he was at and was comfortable seeing him see out that win in Soldiers Field, I think it was an indicator of the ability the guy has. And we saw that in flashes with Leinster. But I do remember saying at the time, playing Pro 14 as it was then, games, you know, while the internationals were away in Leinster and you were beating teams by 20 points every week, playing at full back in a full strength Leinster team, I think it's a completely different challenge that presented than to be the week in, week out first choice 10 in, let's be honest, a less dominant and a team that plays more traditionally, more conservatively in Munster. I think it's a different skill set, a slightly different skill set at times needed in this role than what he exhibited in the game with Leinster, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And look, as you say, there's time in the bank. I mean, conversely as well, Fiona, we look at Jonathan Sexton, who, you know, had a bit of a break, didn't have to go on the Lions tour, which I know he was absolutely gutted about. But, you know, selfishly, from an Irish perspective, it might be the best thing that happened to Johnny Sexton because he was given that time off. His body has rested. He looked very good at the weekend as well. And we are still as reliant on Sexton, however much we want to say we are, as ever, unfortunately or fortunately, however you view that.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, I thought he even varied his range of kicking in the game, in the Leinster game. I thought there was some beautiful little grubber through, chip through another time where Frawley ran onto it. I suppose he's adapting to this new 50-22 law as well, where maybe defenders are sitting a bit deeper, so you're probably looking at maybe exploiting that space behind the first line of defence. And I think he really looked like he was very sharp to that as well in the game at the weekend. I just thought he just looked like a rejuvenated character. I suppose he had a little chip on his shoulder, and every 10 will tell you when they have a chip in their shoulder. And he openly said he was very disappointed about that Lions tour, and probably had a right to be. We saw the way it went, but he came out. He obviously done his business in the pre-season, and he's looking sharp as ever, which is great for Irish rugby. And you know, we just need someone now to follow in his footsteps and put him under a bit of pressure up at the top.
Absolutely. Just speaking of Sexton, I guess that is performance. Yeah.
When did you last see him start the first game of the season?
I'm trying to think. It must be 7 or 8 years.
Like
is it?
Leinster, in fairness, they're probably for the first time in years that a whole bunch of their top players haven't had any summer involvement largely. Like a lot, you know, James Ryan missed out on the Lions, a few more like that. Like they're probably in a position to hit the ground running even more so than they've ever been this season.
Absolutely, 100%. And on that as well. Go on.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. And you actually get the sense of, you know, I think that defeat to La Rochelle last year and the manner of it in the Heineken Champions Cup really has sort of lit a fire under Leinster. The fact that they have the James Ryans, the Johnny Sexton, all those guys driving standard in the pre-season, which they never have. I mean, the guys that were involved with Ireland in the summer were the younger cohort, you know, the likes of Harry Byrne and those lads. Gary Ringrose missed that series. He was out injured as well. So all of a sudden, you've the core of your players who are setting the example for the younger group. You know, the likes of Max Deegan is back in the equation. Caelan Doris, who missed a lot of last year, he's back in there. I mean, Leinster, I think we're going to see a big reaction from them over what happened last year. And I think that's going to drive everything they do. It'll drive the standards. It'll drive the competition for places. And it'll drive the quality that they present week on week.
Yeah, it'll be interesting.
Just wondering, would you have any concerns now that it's a positive for the profile of the tournament, but now that the games aren't being played during international windows, it takes an obvious opportunity for rotation away from all the teams. And we always said we wanted more first choice teams, but more first choice lineups being played. But I would worry for the guys outside the younger players, really, outside not even the 22, but outside 22 to 28, maybe the next bunch of guys coming in, the bottom end of your squad. I think it's going to be very hard for them to get game time of any sort. And, we don't know what's going to happen with the AIL and players being released back to that.
But Wes, is that a bad thing, right? In the context of,
it's a bad thing for those younger players.
It is, but is it a bad thing for the Leinster squad? And I say this because they've rotated, to beat the band for the last few years. And when it's come to the crunch games, they've come down, they've fallen short every single time in those big Champions Cup games.
No, I agree with you there, but that wouldn't be the way I'd be looking at it. I'd be looking at it as there is no, as it stands, second string competition now.
Yeah.
So where are these guys playing now?
Well, they'd have to go elsewhere if they want first.
And you're looking at a young guy like, say, you're talking about Joey Carberry a minute ago. Like, I'd have huge hope for, say, Jack Crowley.
Yeah.
Well, like, what happened? Like, so you're waiting for him to play, and then you've kind of, you're keenly observing him when he does play, but he hasn't played a match in 8 weeks in the meantime.
Here's a mad idea, right? What about these players go and play in the All-Ireland League, from which rugby in this bloody country was founded on? The RFU actually put some effort into running a decent league at the top level, and we bring these players to our own domestic game. Isn't that a crazy idea, lads? What do you think, Donal?
Never heard it before.
I think if they don't let the women play the IL, they're hardly going to leave the lads play. So
you think in fairness, though, Hugh,
serious right in the face here.
You think in fairness, though, as it's currently set up, that performing for Shannon or Cork Khan or whoever is a genuine indicator of whether a guy can play in the European Cup. Not the
way it's set up, but because of the neglect that has been put into this All-Ireland League.
I agree with you, but
and the women's game, which Fiona's going to talk about in a couple of minutes' time, this is where we're at. If they put any sort of effort into running a decent league, we would have a prime sub-system league ready for these players to play week in, week out, in front of their local players, as a kind of a feeder system into them. But that just makes too much sense, Donald, doesn't it?
Well, look, the bottom line is there is issues at the moment because, things like the Celtic Cup, I think, have been put in abeyance because of the COVID. I mean, we're far from out of this scenario without getting too morbid about it, but it is still having an impact on the game. Now, I have to say, to be fair, I just heard the first round of the All-Ireland League is starting over the weekend, and we got indications that some of the players will be made available to the teams. That was unexpected. Because of the bubble scenario, but that, obviously things have eased out there. So it looks as if a certain cohort of players around the country, to be fair to the provinces, will be released to their clubs this weekend, which is great to see. In terms of, look, I think we cribbed for so long that every year Leinster, you get to April or May and Leo comes out and, it is always somewhere between 50 and 52 players have performed for Leinster in the Pro 14. It's great that they do get exposure, but I also think at times that they create bad habits because even with all those changes, those players aren't stressed enough. So that really, it doesn't achieve a whole lot in the longer term. But for me, look, I'm quite happy with the new format. I think it is way better. We're now going to have interprovincials where the squads will see the best players. We'll see the best of Munster and Leinster, Ulster and Connacht playing off against each other. There's an internal trophy now for that because of the new qualification system for the Heineken Champions Cup. There's a separate pool. So there's only one Irish squad guaranteed to get into the Heineken Cup. So that's going to make those games far more competitive. Yes, there is a cost at the other end in terms of bringing on the players, the younger players, but they just have to find another avenue for that. And I still think there'll be plenty of rotation.
Yeah, absolutely. Just on the Leinster then, Neil Treacy spoke to Leinster coach Stuart Lancaster this week and started by asking him how satisfied he was with the 31-3 win against the Bulls, especially given that they'd only played one pre-season match against Harlequins. This is what he had to say.
I thought the pre-season game was a good one for us. English champions coming to the Aviva. I think they were only missing like Joe Mara and Marcus Smith, and I think we were missing 15 or so. So to get that performance under the belt was good. He's right in that we were a bit nervous about being undercooked, particularly playing against a team that have played non-stop for the last 6 or 7 months. Currie Cup champions. They were scoring or have scored an average of 40 points a game for the last 6 games. So, and they've got Jake White as coach. They've just had Bismarck Duplessis. They've got Marcel Cossier as the captain. A really serious outfit. So to beat them 31-3 and keep them to 3 was really pleasing. And I think people maybe don't appreciate how strong a team Bulls are going to be and how hard they're going to be to beat. So to play them first up and get that result, we were really pleased.
And you say you were maybe a little bit nervous going into it about just the lack of game time, but was the fact that you had the likes of Johnny Sexton, James Ryan, Andrew Porter, Gary Ringrose, a lot of those experienced internationals available, where normally you wouldn't at this stage of the season. Did that kind of help ease things a little bit?
Yeah, but only because they've had a good pre-season themselves. So obviously they had a decent break from the summer series. Johnny obviously didn't play in the summer series, so he was straight back to pre-season. So we'd had a good 5-6 weeks with him. So we were pretty confident, and we back our training methods and our training regime to get them ready. But you never really know is the answer. I was pleased with how the Quins game went. I was pleased with how the Bulls game went, but I still felt we had opportunities that we left out there that we could have taken. And it's a start. That's all it is. It's we end of September and we're talking about finals rugby in June. So there's a long way to go.
And lastly for me then, you mentioned how you had Johnny all summer, that he wasn't involved with Ireland and he's had a big pre-season behind him. How important has that been for not just himself but even the younger players in the squad to be able to be around someone like Johnny Sexton with his experience over the course of a full pre-season?
Yeah, I think he's it's invaluable, really. it's you can't put a price on learning from a player like Johnny. Really, it's very hard to replicate that as a coach. Johnny would hold them to account, and if standards were high enough, he definitely does that. So there's a standard that he sets, an expectation that means that the young players learn what that level is, but also they learn the subtlety of his game and the ability of him to manipulate defenders and create space and his vision to be able to see things early. So you can talk to players about that, but unless you've seen it firsthand, it's very hard to coach. So it's been invaluable for me, really. I'll give you an example. My son has just signed at Leicester, so he's with George Ford as he's a 10 and 10-12, and every day he's coming back saying, "Oh, George taught me this," or "I learnt this from George." And it's the same with our lads. When you've got the likes of Johnny in there, like I say, I think when we look back in a few years' time, it'll have been one of the best pre-seasons ever that they've had. But also, I think that he's had, because he's been able to really commit to training full time, get his body in good shape. And I think you can see it in his performances.
Okay, so that's Stuart Lancaster speaking to Neil Treacy. I want to mention Connacht as well. Bernard Jacklin wrote a really good piece in the Sunday Independent, Fiona, about Connacht and I guess the investment needed from the RFU in order to make them, sustainably competitive over the coming season. We saw on Friday night when they went to Cardiff. Again, Cardiff played very well, but Andy Flynn is almost caught between two stools here in that he doesn't have the size of players needed to play a certain type of way, so he has to adapt. But yet playing that way as well can lead to situations like you go to a Cardiff on a Friday night and you concede a load of points. I love what he's trying to do at Connacht. They need investment though, and they need more players really, I guess, to make them more competitive.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there was, is it Fafita that was injured as well during the week? And I think he will definitely add something to that squad. We thought maybe adding, I certainly did, Papa Lee come in. Thought that he would make a massive difference, but I suppose maybe he was just getting used to the system. His discipline at times let him down for Connacht. So they've definitely got some sort of slight structure there, but it's investment is what they need. I watched the game myself on Friday night, and I thought while Cardiff were good, I thought Connacht actually performed quite poorly. I was very disappointed with the two centres, Tom Farrell and Tom Daly. I thought they weren't great, which Tom Daly last season was absolutely outstanding all season. I thought he was on the verge of maybe getting up into an Irish camp. I think he was called once maybe. So I think a friend is building something, but it's definitely, I think it's definitely bigger players. The pack, Beelum, the front row at times can be hit and miss. Dennis Buckley's in, out. I think when they're missing their starters, their main guys, they tend to be at the end of a big point loss, and you know, there's no team that can deal with that. You really need to have the equivalent. I mean, we saw Ulster at the weekend, and what they brought off the bench was probably the making of the game for them. I thought, you know, Tom O'Toole was outstanding. So I think Connacht need to get to a place where they're bringing on their players off the bench, and it's an absolutely same standard of game, and it keeps going. And that's what I found at times that hasn't happened with Connacht. So it's definitely investment and lacking those big ball carriers.
Yeah, because we've seen, Donal, from Connacht as well, that they are capable of beating anybody on their day. It's just the consistency, I guess, at the very, very top, which, as Fiona mentioned, requires more personnel. It requires a stronger squad, and their frontline guys being available to them all the time, which just doesn't happen, as is the case in rugby, you know.
Yeah, look, and it is going to be more challenging, obviously, because they'll be playing opponents this year who'll be they'll be more fully locked and loaded than they would have been in the past. Certainly, when it comes to the interprovincial games. Just going back to the piece that Bert wrote. Look, I mean, you know, it doesn't sort of sit well now in the professional game when you're saving pennies, getting on the sort of the red eye flight. That has an impact. You know, he was talking about they flew home at 7 a.m. in the morning from Cardiff. Certainly, I know the other provinces, they'd be chartering flights for those playing. So therefore, you're back. You might be home at 2 a.m, but at least you're waking up in your own bed, and that makes a huge difference in terms of the start of your preparation for next week. I mean, they have a tough game now. You know, they're playing the Bulls on Friday night. So therefore, even from that point of view, they'd have one less day turnaround in terms of, well, they're playing Friday. But I think the Bulls will be better for their game against Leinster all of a sudden. Like, given the quality and the experience of a lot of those players, I think a bulb will have gone off now because they played Benetton in Italy, were beaten in that Rainbow Cup final. They've now played Leinster and were really put to the sword with a Leinster team who still have a lot of key players to come into it. So I'd be interested to see how the Bulls react, but I think that's going to prove, that'll be a very interesting game on Friday night. But, you know, you mentioned Andy Friend to me, since he's gone out west, he's managed to sort of squeeze and maximise the best out of what they have. But it is a challenge, and you can see he gets frustrated at times because just when he thinks they have that level of consistency or they're maybe getting to the next level, they just seem to fall off the stairs and have to start at the bottom again.
Yeah, exactly. I did see Hugh Horgan sent me a picture of a couple of the Sharks boys, Grobbelaar, I think, and Roots last night in the Boar's Head with about 40 pints of Guinness behind them. So maybe they're on a night out ahead of the Ospreys this week. I'll be interested to see how they perform after a night out in the Boar's Head. But listen, I want to move on, if we can, to Saturday, Fiona, because I don't even know what to say anymore. The performance against Scotland was simply not good enough. I know the players were desperately upset at the end, and I did feel for, you know, every single one of them, because they were so desperate to qualify for the World Cup. But if I'm being brutally honest with you, over the course of those 3 games, the qualifiers, they simply were not good enough. And, you know, I know there are huge external factors behind that, which we get into. But in terms of performance levels, they can have no complaints because they just weren't good enough. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think I read something during the week, Alan Quinlan said, you know, that the players have to look at themselves as well. And I would firmly believe they are doing that. I've said before, you know, they've worked set piece up at camp. They've had people in. They've had a lot of time done on that line out and scrum, and for it to implode the way it did over the course of the 3 games, I mean, the players have to put their hand up and take responsibility for that. You can't blame a coaching setup 100% for that. In general, you know, people looked at selection and maybe looked around that, and was that a reasoning behind that? But I firmly believe anyone that's invited to any camp, and when you're up at camp, everybody is at that level. So you should be able, when you're picked, you should be able to go out there and perform. And at times they didn't. The decision making at times was crazy. The catch pass was not up to scratch. That was one of the things I thought we'd worked a lot on in camps in the last, over COVID. They talked a lot about it, and it just didn't seem to happen. So yeah, I 100% agree with the players need to stand up as well, and they certainly will. And a lot of them are so disappointed in how they performed.
You mentioned selection there. Does that not have to come into it as a huge, I guess, head scratcher in many ways? You know, you mentioned the line out there. Even McDermott has been a huge part of their line. It's like taking Devon Toner out of the Leinster Ireland setup, you know, when he was the go-to for the last couple of years. She was taken out of the team in the first game. No Claire Malloy in the starting team, which again, I just don't understand. Now, maybe there's reasons behind it, but certainly I haven't heard a good reason yet why she wasn't in the starting 15. Anna Capel's not even making the squad. She signed a contract with Harlequins. She was one of Ireland's best back row forwards in the last couple of years. I mean, Lucy Mahal starting in the outside centre. I'm a huge fan of Lucy as well, but straight from the 7s into 13, where she was just left totally exposed, I think. And when Eve Higgins has been doing a good job. Like, these are key selection decisions, Fiona, that Adam Griggs made. And I'm baffled. I'm absolutely baffled by every single one of them.
Yeah, I suppose I'm going to have to put my hand up and say I'm absolutely baffled as well. You know, it's some of those decisions. I mean, we'll focus on one in particular, the Claire Malloy decision. I mean, 74 caps, what she can offer you, whether, as I spoke before, whether she's like 0.4 of a second slower getting up off the ruck, the way they measure things now, getting up off the ground, and whoever else is coming in behind her. When it comes to the heat of the battle in the game, that does not matter, you know, and what she can offer you and what she did offer when she came on and on those last 2 games was immense. I mean, we saw in the last game you spoke, I mean, I was listening to you spoke about like her turnover. I know at a very, very key point of the game, I know it was turned around due to the high tackle, but that turnover was immense. And there's very few players that know how to judge a ruck like that. You know, it's the years of playing where you give the referee that look up and you know whether you can go in there, whether you can get away with one, whether you're quick enough. And she just absolutely has that. Yeah, she might give away 1 or 2 penalties every couple of games, but she is one of the best in the business. She's the best female 7 I've ever played with or seen playing. And it baffled me. It baffled me. I suppose if you want to breathe in youth, I still think you need to have a couple of old heads around to show them the ropes. And I think that's what they lacked.
Yeah, and look, overall, Wes, you know, Donald, sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, just on that point, I mean, the one thing that struck me about the match, watch the anthems, right? I think Ireland's call was first. And if you looked at the faces of the girls, they looked absolutely petrified. There was a sort of a vacant stare there. You could feel the pressure on their shoulders long before the game started. Go down the line, Scotland were second. All the Scottish girls, they were singing proudly, they were smiling. It was almost as if they'd identified 1 or 2 of the family in the crowd. And when I looked at that, now, admittedly, I looked back in the game, I didn't see it live, but, you know, I like to watch things like that. Body language is very important. So therefore, even a Claire Malloy, given her experience, going into that sort of a decider, like, that's a function of management for me. You've got to assess the mood of the team. You've got to take the pressure off the players, okay? And a Claire Malloy, the experience that she would bring in a key game like that, just even in the dressing room before you go out, when you're in your huddle and you're looking around, and just seeing her in that huddle for a lot of those younger players, I have no doubt would have lifted them further. But, you know, it's all about the atmosphere that you create. But that one impact alone, you know, when I saw the girls' faces in the anthems, you know, I felt, Jesus, they seem to have the weight of a nation on their shoulders. And then on the final whistle, I mean, the scenes were harrowing. You play sport for enjoyment. We all know you lose far more in sport than you win. And that's why the good days are there to be celebrated. But I have to say, I mean, they were harrowing, those scenes at the end. And, you know, I felt so sorry. Ciara Griffin, I've met her a couple of times. She's a really impressive girl. She talks so much about the jersey. She's a passionate Kerry woman. And yeah, she is. And look, you know, to see her, Senna Inupu, just comforting her at the end, it was sad. I really felt sorry for them because, you know, bear in mind, throughout this COVID thing, all these girls are working, or the vast majority of them are working. The sacrifices that they made, you know, to have nothing to show for it. But look, I also agree, you judged on your performances on the field, and you know, they were off the pace in so many things. If your set piece is under the pressure that it is, and what's wrong, you know, in the modern game, like from a lineup perspective, you can cut your lineup because of lifting. You can create space. You can create movement. The primary thing is to win the ball. Worry about what you're doing with the ball after you've won it. But, you know, I think we could have been a little more innovative in terms of what we did around lineup. But that didn't happen either. But look, it was a very sad day.
But with that, sorry you to come in there and Donal, but with that, you learn that through playing the games, through getting involved. And I know with COVID and everything, but a lot of those girls that were leaders in that line out have played very little club game and have played very few games maybe at that high level. Do you know what I mean? So for them not to spend maybe 18 months not being under that pressure of a game, whether it was an opposition at club or whatever, it makes a massive difference because your mind is relaxed at camp. Everyone knows what the line out call is, you know where it's going. There was no pressure on.
Fiona, sorry to cut in, Jim. What's the rationale between when there was an interprovincial series right before these games, crucial match rugby that these players badly needed? What was the mindset that said, we're not going to let them play rugby matches, we're going to keep them in camp here, and that's good preparation for the most important games we're going to have this year?
Now, I'm not too sure if they tried to maybe make the interpros earlier, and I don't know if there was issues with COVID and getting them earlier, but I'm sure they could have sorted something out. I would believe that the rationale in their minds would be they would learn more up at camp than performing because they'd have to be released, I suppose, back to Munster, Leinster, Connacht, Ulster to train, and they were keeping them in a bubble. So I don't think it was the correct decision. That's because they hadn't played rugby in a long time. I know a few have been playing over in England and were flying over and back, but it for them to get a feel of that interpros and start playing that competitive rugby, whether it was at international standard or not, it wasn't, but it's getting the games under your belt and getting that fitness about yourself.
Wes,
just on that, sorry, Hugh, I asked a question of somebody in the RFU, exactly that point. Why was the interpros? Could they have played them a little bit earlier, or why were the girls not involved? And I was told, look, it all came down to this COVID bubble. The most important thing was for them to actually get to the qualification phase of the tournament in Italy, because the girls are working, everyday lives and their everyday jobs, and then obviously going into a different camps, and we have seen that happen, obviously, in the professional area. It's very difficult then. It's the chicken and egg scenario. Like if you let them in and some of them get COVID, then they're out of the tournament. But then by not letting them in, they don't have the competitive rugby that Fiona is talking about. And I have to say, I watched the Munster Leinster, the Interpro decider, and I was pleasantly surprised. I must admit, by the quality of the game, by the certainly in terms of the attacking intent, the quality of passing that Fiona. And I know obviously international rugby, there's less space, there's more pressure, defences are better organised. But I thought the quality of the game was brilliant. I really enjoyed that Munster Leinster game. But look, that was the technical reason that I was given as to why they weren't involved, because I can go back to the first ever World Cup from a men's perspective, 1987. We were stopped playing rugby 5 weeks beforehand. And I was captain at the time. I was absolutely against this. And I was actually going to protest in terms of, I was going to play for Cork in the Munster Cup, but we got beaten in the quarterfinal, so I didn't have the opportunity. We were out of the cup. But anyway, I mean, that's a long time ago, and there's a far more science involved around what's there now. But you go back, look, I mean, the opening game against Spain, in some respects, maybe if to Scotland or Italy were first up, they might have taken a different approach. So, that kind of, I won't say, that they were more confident going in, but it just started badly and went from bad to worse.
Yeah, it did. Wes, we know there's an internal review, I think now from the RFU, which
they're usually very fruitful.
You see, this is immediately. Well, what's the self examination going to yield here from the RFU? Because in order for it to be actually something worthwhile, they're going to have to be very, very self-critical, because the reality is the women's game has just been thrown under the bus really since that Grand Slam winning team, since Fiona's time. Since the World Cup even was here, there's absolutely no ground being made in terms of developing the game. As you can judge, you only have to look at the AIL now, and a handful of teams compete every week, which means there's no real numbers playing the game. There's very little selection to choose from in terms of player numbers. And this is the result now that Ireland will not be competing in the World Cup next year.
Yeah, look, Fiona will know the detail on a lot of this a lot better than I will, but there was, I suppose, all the initial commentary after this, or most of it, focused on the kind of systemic structural issues with, the women's game's been neglected. Let's put it under that umbrella for the minute. And I think there's no doubt that, you know, when in the space of 4 months, you have that changing room fiasco and you have a head coach saying he doesn't know who his boss is a couple of months previously. I think there's no doubt there is structural issues there. I think we're all in agreement on that. But I don't, like, I think a lot of the comment, like, frankly, I don't believe the sincerity of it. I see people tweeting about it, writing about it, that I know for years that are in the media. I don't know if they really give a shit, or is it just virtue signaling, as it's called?
Yeah.
And it's counterproductive, I think. If there isn't sincerity behind it, and it blows itself out, that criticism then after a while. But having said that, you get away from that stuff and onto what happened on the field. I think I heard Fiona Coughlin on the 9 o'clock news on Monday night, and it was the first time I'd heard someone in the intervening time say, well, the players and the management have to take some responsibility. It was almost like everything had to be put on the wider structural issues. And, you know, it's good that the conversation has moved on, because you're not really going to get anywhere if there's always something to be blamed. And it's always this comparison with the men's game and the equivalence. But I mean, I think if you looked at another amateur sport in the country, I mean, if you look at the Meads footballers that won the All-Ireland this year, do you think the same standards, the same drive for excellence and accountability exists in the Irish women's rugby team as exists in that Mead football team? Yeah. Honestly. No. And maybe Fiona knows.
Well,
I don't.
That same, and this is when I started with this, Fiona, I mentioned first of all the performances of the players wasn't good enough. I mentioned second of all the selection decisions by Adam Griggs, which were bizarre, and they are bizarre. And the reason I mentioned those two is because this same Ireland team blew Scotland out of the water in the Six Nations last week. They blew Wales out of the water, teams who would, you know, comfortably, absolutely beaten. So what has happened between the Six Nations Championship, and they're actually competitive enough in parts against France or whatever, what has happened since then to put in that level of performance over the last 3 games? And I don't expect full answers now, but that's where we're scratching our heads, I guess, you know?
Yeah. And I suppose, look, I remember a few years ago as well. Now, it's probably done correctly at times, but I remember a few years ago, there was issues in camp at the time because all of a sudden, sevens players just came in. They were just thrown in at the, you know, and that had to be sorted out. And I think it was around the World Cup time as well. There was more of that. So I suppose, when you look at the difference, there's no issue with those 7 players coming in. You know, they're talented, they're full-time athletes. There's absolutely no issue around that. But for players, and from what I can take from understanding, sometimes it's an absolute disrespect for the game of 15s, women's 15s, that you can say, here, just throw that athlete in there and they will be able to play outside centre, they'll be able to play. Can they? Of course they can, and they would have the ability to be the best in the country. But why aren't they playing rugby like the rest of us, and you earn how you get in there? Why is that not where you're told, play your 15s rugby, get out there, play it every week, and we'll have a look at you then. If you're thrown in and you're brought in, I think, and that's something that has been said to me by a few people, that when you're up there and all of a sudden someone comes in who hasn't spent years practicing the fine and intricacies, say, of playing it, say if it won't happen in front row, I hope to God yet, did the throw sevens player. But imagine you're propping and go and draw a lot, and then someone just comes in having never endured that lifetime of people drooling on your face in the AIL, or you all know the little things that goes on there, you know. It's just kind of, I suppose, there's that disconnect, and the girls will tell you there probably wasn't, and they mightn't have noticed it, but sometimes there's something hidden there when you're not playing with people you're seeing playing rugby every week in, week out. And
again, I'm not to throw, like Lucy Mulhall, I've watched her the last 5 years. She's a phenomenal athlete, and I'm sure in time will prove to be a very good 15s player, but she was thrown under the bus there because she's picked it outside centre for the first game of the qualifiers with the whole team underperformed, and she's chopped and didn't get a single second again afterwards after that game. So how much she feel now? Well, God almighty, like, her confidence must be rock bottom. How they let Hannah Tyrrell retire after the Six Nations, our stand-in number 10, our key pivotal player, was just allowed to walk away into the sunset without so much as a whisper about it. And Stacey Flew, who had played 3 times at number 10 beforehand, in as your starting pivot number 10. Those decisions to me make zero sense, and they fall on the coach. And like Adam Griggs, he can say, yeah, good for the players and all that kind of stuff, and we can point to the stuff behind the scenes at the RFU, and they're all valid. But Adam Griggs is going to have a look at himself, surely now, and actually decide if he wants to take this forward, if he can indeed take them forward.
Yeah, and it's exactly that. It's those, and as you said, Lucy's probably one of the best sevens players in Ireland. She's absolutely outstanding at what she does, and it was sad to see for her to be put in there at that level in that high intense game that was really important for the whole of the country, and that thrown on her shoulders and then dropped and not even on the squad, I don't think, after that. So that's not going to, even whether you're Lucy or not, that doesn't build a good taste in the squad. You know what I mean? You're on the outside, you're looking at that, you're thinking, does my coach back me, whatever you feel. But they've definitely, some of those decisions, 100% he made them, and he has to back his decisions, and he has these reasons, I'm 100% sure. But as for the whole benefit of the squad, I would wonder about that sometimes.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, Fiona.
Sorry, you boys, go on. Drive on.
I think you mentioned players not playing in the interpros that were involved in the squad, but I think, like, as far as my understanding, there's another 20 plus players on some form of contract, largely primarily for sevens, that weren't even involved in the interpros. So the interpros essentially became devoid of the 50 best players in the country.
Yeah, well, accurate? Yeah. Well, 50, yeah. I'm sure some of those girls, no offense to them, might have gone down to the provinces and maybe not have been selected because they've only played sevens. But yes, there was a lot of sevens girls who were contracted. And I think there was talk maybe by a couple of media people afterwards that they were actually in, when the interpros were going on, they were away watching the game. Like, so it's something, if you want to blend that mix of sevens and 15s together, even like keep them contracted, let them play sevens, but when there's big games like that or big competitions, they need to be playing that. They need to be getting that 15s rugby if you believe they're a similar game.
Sorry, can I ask Fiona a question just from a broader perspective in terms, like, you're the Munster under-18s coach, so therefore you're dealing at the grassroots, if you like. You're seeing the kids that are coming up, and I'm speaking from clubland in terms of, like, in Munster, and correct me, I think we Ballincollig have a club in Cork, and there's only one club in Limerick. Yeah,
so, I'm head coach of Ballincollig this year as well. I left Bowes last year. So
well done, by the way. Well done last weekend. That was a massive result. Massive result for you guys as well. Sorry, go on.
It was, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, well, great. And I have a lot of friends out in Ballincollig, so delighted to see them doing well. But I'm talking in a broader context here. Like, obviously, established senior clubs like my own in Cork, we don't have a ladies team, and we looked into it, and there are so many, like, club rugby in Ireland has massive, even more so since COVID. I mean, and I've been speaking to club presidents around the country. Volunteerism is a big issue now because people who've been out of the loop for 2 years haven't got back involved in clubland. Space, I mean, if we were to have a ladies side in Con, we'd have a problem pitches wise. We'd have a problem dressing room wise. Who would take on the challenge, because it's something that we've spoken about and something that we'd like to develop, but we just don't have the resources to do it. So where are these young, and that is replicated by a lot of, if you like, established men's clubs around the country. So how do we grow the game from the kids' perspective? Are you starting clubs from fresh? I don't even know where you start. I mean, like, your girls at under-18 level, where are they coming from? Where are they learning their rugby?
Deep down in the back arse of Cork, I think, is a lot of them. There's a lot of good rugby be playing down in West Cork. But no, look, I think Donal, sometimes as well, it's like, oh, let's start up a women's team. And in like, it is a good idea, but sometimes there's too many teams. So what I would find at times is when I was coaching Bowes or coaching Ballincollig now, that there's a lot of players playing that would be really, really good. And say there's a massive gap between AIL and the next level of rugby played, and they don't want to leave their clubs because they enjoyed it. That's where they learned rugby. That's where they want to stay. So I think the more and more clubs that come on board, it's just about getting together and maybe getting that kind kind of dual status system working where you can get people playing up when they're at the level. Because at the end of the day, there's probably about 20% of maybe even less that will play up at a Munster or an Ireland thing. So it's about enjoying the game, and it's great. And at the club in Ballincollig this weekend, it was absolutely buzzing. The whole of Ballincollig nearly was out watching the match. It was amazing to see, and to see that. And since I've got there, I've noticed that they're underage girls. And I met a man that I coached in Dolphin, and he was bringing down his girl to Ballincollig. She was like 5 or 6, just because he knew I was coaching there. And the girls' side have grown. So it's kind of getting the girls out at a young age and playing with Cork, playing whatever. And then I suppose it's looking at maybe shipping them on after that. I know a lot of clubs don't like doing that, but feeder clubs definitely are something, and getting them out, getting that whole thing going. And then you direct them in up to that top level, and you want them getting the best coaching from there. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, and we'll get back into this, I'm sure, later on in the season, guys. We're just out of time, unfortunately. Fiona, thanks so much, but thanks to Wes and to Donal as well. 7:35, Munster Stormers live on RT2 this weekend, so tune in for that. To Munster fans, I would appeal for your own health and safety. If you're making away from Thomond Park after, just get out of Donal's way. Otherwise, you get a shovel hand off to the face as you're making a beeline for his car down to Cork. Well, thanks to the lads. Thanks for your company as well. We will talk to you next week. Good luck.
The RTÉ Rugby Podcast, sponsored by Canterbury, proud official kit suppliers to the Irish men and women's rugby teams.